Hey guys, we are back updating the power rankings for the Traitors US Season 3 following the 7th batch of episodes, also known as Episode 9. And this was another pretty fun episode with a pretty fun back and forth and a pretty interesting outcome, but we'll get to that soon enough. But we have 9 people to talk about, and as always, some more time. Let's get into the video. So starting off at number 9, we have the first boo from this latest episode, and here we have Sam. And there's not really much to say here. I mean, I pretty much saw this coming. I mean, the show literally spoils that Sam was going to be murdered within the next round from the next time on last week. And even beyond that, he was barely on the show. I never really thought he had much of a chance of winning. And I'm not entirely sure why he was so under-edited, where I assume it's just because he was boring, but he wasn't necessarily a bad player per se. I mean, it didn't seem like he was playing particularly poorly by the end of it, but at the end of the day, he was just kind of a non-factor on the show up until his last full episode here. But again, not too surprised he was actually murdered here, considering his content from the last episode, but also the fact that the preview literally showed it. But obviously, he's now out of the game to where he's here at number 9. Now moving on to number 8, and we have the other boot from this week, and here we have Carolyn Weiger. And I'm actually surprised that Carolyn went out in this spot, where I thought for pretty much the entire season that Carolyn was going to be the last of the original Traitors here, where I thought she was going to win the battle against Danielle, that she was going to outlast her, and obviously make it deeper into the game. I mean, I think that was very much reflected in her being pretty high in my power rankings for a lot of the season. But no, she loses the battle against Danielle, which I find very strange here. Now within the episode itself, it was kind of a back and forth for a lot of it in terms of whether Carolyn was going to go out, to where while there were signs that Carolyn was like being set up to lose this battle at the round table, I feel like it wasn't until the actual round table itself that I was convinced that Carolyn was going to go out, where it seemed like during the round table itself that Danielle was way more prepared for the battle here, whereas Carolyn just kind of broke down, didn't really give a lot of good answers to Danielle. Obviously, she gets pretty emotional there. And I felt like by that point, I was leaning towards Carolyn going out, though even then, like there was still a world where the votes could have shifted over to Danielle. I feel like it wasn't entirely clear cut that Carolyn was going to lose the battle until that actual roundtable here. And then obviously mixing in the context with the rest of the season before this point, I did think that Carolyn was getting a pretty strong edit for a lot of the season, where I thought it was just going to be a matter of whether she'll get to the end in a spot to where people will think that she can't be a traitor. So obviously that's for nothing at this point, as Carolyn does end up being taken out in this spot. And obviously I do feel bad for Carolyn here. I mean, I feel like this run was pretty similar to what we saw from her in Survivor 44, where despite her having like good ideas and her having a good sense of what to do in the game, no one really took her that seriously for a lot of the game, and there were many points where she was just getting steamrolled and not really getting her way, and even at the points where she was pushing more to try to be taken seriously, it just kind of gave her mixed results by the end of it. And obviously we saw that play out, where she was ultimately sandbagged at the round table, where despite her having this plan of pulling the trigger against Danielle, she wasn't fully committed to it until the point where Danielle was fully prepared to strike against her, and obviously she just couldn't rise up to that. So obviously those things are not particularly great. And while I am glad that Carolyn got another chance to be on a reality show and have some potential within the game, it obviously resulted in her once again being unable to win the season, but obviously she's now out of the game as well, to where she's here at number 8. And with that, we have 7 people left in the game to talk about, and as usual, I'll be ranking them based on how likely I think they are to win the game based on their edit and current game position. And to be honest, these bottom 2 are pretty clear cut for me, and the order within them doesn't really matter, as I don't think they're winning the game at this point. But number 7, we do have Lord Ivar, and again, Lord Ivar is just kind of there, kind of a non-factor on the show. And the reason he's at the very bottom is that I think he's probably the most likely to be murdered next between him and the next person, where he does get a bit more content this episode. He does get a visibility spike with him sort of debating whether he thinks Danielle or Carolyn's a traitor, where for a lot of the episode it made it seem like he was going to side with Carolyn in this whole debacle, only for him to be a vote against Carolyn, which was a pretty bad sign for Carolyn, as it made it seem like the numbers just weren't going to be there at the point where Ivar was voting against her, so that's not particularly great. And again, I feel like Ivar is probably most likely to be murdered next, as he's already been a target at numerous points. And considering that Dolores has been talked about as a potential traitor option, I feel like it makes more sense for Ivar to be murdered next as a potential way to throw Dolores under the bus at the next round table. So I feel like that makes a lot of sense there. But again, Ivar's not winning, which is why he's here at number 7. Now moving on to number 6, and we have someone who I just mentioned, but we do have Dolores. And again, Dolores is the other non-factor here, someone who's been pretty under-edited for a lot of the season, someone who I can't really see getting to the end at this point. And again, I am on the fence over whether she'll be banished to the next round or whether she'll be like the last murder of the season. I'm probably leaning more towards her being like the last murder, if I'm being honest. As truth be told, I think a traitor will probably be exposed at the next round table anyway. But again, we'll see how that pans out. But either way, I don't think Dolores is winning either. I feel like she's in a very similar boat to Ivar. The reason she's above Ivar is that I think Ivar's more likely to be murdered next compared to Dolores. But either way, neither of them are winning, which is why she's here at number 6. Now moving on to number 5, and we have someone who has gone up a little bit since his last ranking, even though I still don't think they're actually going to win. By number 5, we do have Danielle Reyes. And Danielle actually did it. She actually won the battle against Carolyn, which I did not expect for a lot of the season. I felt like Danielle was pretty primed to go up before Carolyn, though obviously I ended up being wrong here. And you could definitely debate her being higher, considering we have been getting the setup to this relationship with Britney for a lot of the season, and now that's starting to pan out, where Danielle has recruited Britney to be a traitor, which she'll probably end up accepting here. And through that, you would expect that Danielle would have a better road to the end at this point. But if I'm being honest, I still don't think Danielle is winning. I feel like her edit up to this point has been way too sloppy for her to actually go on to be a winner of the season, or at least a satisfying winner, where I feel like we have gotten so many points on the show where they hyped up the fact that she is just overreacting, that she's just playing the theatrics of it all, and that people are annoyed by that, and some people are even sus of her because of that. And again, while we've heard from outside the show that those things aren't actually that big of a deal, the fact that the show is propping them up as being like these big knocks at Danielle's game is probably not a good sign that she'll go on to actually win the game here. And again, while she ends up beating Carolyn, who was her biggest source of opposition, or at least seemingly so, I still think there are seeds to Danielle being taken out here, particularly with the likes of Dylan and Gabby starting to pay more attention to Danielle, with Dylan in particular talking a lot in this episode about how Danielle is someone that he trusted and that he needs to reevaluate his relationships now that it's the end game. And while that doesn't pan out in this episode to where he still decides to stick with Danielle for this particular vote, I still think this is going to play a factor in future rounds, and I do see a world where Danielle is probably taken out in the next few round tables, where I could see the likes of Britney, for instance, taking out Danielle here. I think another thing to mention is the seer twist that's going to come into play, which was a thing that was utilized on the Traitors UK, which I haven't seen the Traitors UK, so I don't know the full context of it, but from what I heard, it is a pretty powerful twist that essentially could end up screwing over a traitor, and I could very well see Danielle being screwed over because of that. So I just think there is just so many things going against Danielle, both from a gameplay perspective, but also from an edit perspective. And I would still be very shocked to see Danielle actually go on to win the game, which is why she's here at number 5. Now moving on to number 4, and from this point on, I would say these top 4 people actually do have a shot of winning the season. However, this number 4 person is definitely more of a dark horse contender than a true contender. By number 4, we do have Tom Sandoval. And again, I think Tom is a dark horse to win the season. Now, admittedly, I still don't think it's super likely that he goes on to win, but I feel like the fact that he has been more of a factor on the show than the likes of Ivar or Dolores, mixing in the fact that he is at least being shown positively at points, makes me think there is a world where if the likes of Gabby or Dylan have a downfall at the end, if the likes of Britney has a big downfall, that I could see a world where Tom goes on to win. I mean, it doesn't seem like anyone actually sees Tom as a traitor, where even Dolores, the person that targeted him in the last round, was doing it more so out of retaliation due to Tom still voting for Dolores in this round. So again, I still think Tom has a outside chance of winning, even though I don't see him as a front runner at this point, which is why he's here at number 4. Now moving on to number 3, and like I said, I feel like these 3 are the true contenders to win, where I feel like at this point the season can go one of two ways, where you either have a faithful win or a traitor win. It's just a matter of which one. Though at number 3, I am sticking with the faithful side of things, and number 3 we do have Dylan. And Dylan is someone who, again, I think there is a very strong chance that he gets towards the end of the game at this point, where he is continuing to be set up as a major character here, where in this episode, he talks a lot about working with Gabby, where he talks about how he had previously thought of Gabby as a potential traitor, but now is more open to working with her. And I feel like through that, there's definitely a world where Dylan and Gabby become like this tag team that is trying to take out the traitors, and I think that will probably pay dividends with them taking out Danielle in the next few rounds, so I feel like there's that. And even beyond that, I still think Dylan is getting decent content on the show to where he's at least explaining like his actual decision making here. He gets a confessional explaining why he voted for Carolyn when it seemed like earlier in the episode that he was leaning towards taking out Danielle in this spot. So I still think there is a storyline for Dylan to go on to win the game here. However, if I'm being honest, I think at this point, it's looking more like Dylan, if he were to win, would be doing so alongside Gabby. So where I feel like the one of the more likely outcomes of the season is a Dylan-Gabby joint win, which effectively makes the two of them pretty close here in the power ranking. But it's the fact that I did have Dylan lower last week that leaves him technically below Gabby, but he's still someone who I think is somewhat likely to win, which is why he's here at number 3. Now moving on to number 2, and we have someone who I just mentioned, but we do have Gabby. And like I said, I feel like if Gabby were to win from this point on, it would most likely be a joint win with Dylan Efron here, which I think would make a decent amount of sense here. And plus I still think this was a decent episode for her edit-wise, to where she gets to respond to Dylan wanting to work with her, noting how Dylan had accused her of being a traitor, and now she gets to say, mark her words, they always come back, which is pretty funny there. And again, I feel like Gabby and Dylan are kind of being set up to work together in eventually taking out the traitors, so at least taking out Danielle at least. So I think we are leaning towards a possible Dylan-Gabby joint win, which is one of the two outcomes I see the season playing out as. However, that is not the only way that the season could end, and if I'm being honest at this point, I still think we could be getting a traitor win here, which obviously would leave Dylan and Gabby a bit lower. But until I'm proven wrong, I am still going to leave the two faithfuls here lower than the number 1 person to where they're here at number 2. And now, at number 1, the person I believe is the most likely to win the Traitors US Season 3 at this point is Britney Haynes. Now, like I said, I feel like the season really has 2 endings at this point, one being a Dylan-Gabby joint win, but the other one being a Britney solo traitor win, where at this point, while we have been getting set up on the show to Britney and Danielle working together, I don't think Danielle's winning. I think Danielle's most likely going to get cut before the end, where presumably it seems like Dylan and Gabby are going to lead that charge in taking out Danielle. However, I still think Britney is in a very prime spot to go on to win the game, where obviously we get in this episode that Danielle's recruiting her to be a traitor. And while they made it seem like it was a choice, I mean, come on, Britney is going to accept this. Britney is going to be a traitor. And I think Britney should be in an interesting spot here coming in as a traitor. Now, while she is not without her sus, where I still think Dylan could target her in the near future, I think Britney's actually still getting a pretty decent edit where she gets to talk on the show about working alongside Danielle. And I think there's definitely a lot of potential here for Britney to navigate through the game, where, again, despite there being some sus on her, I think there's more sus on Danielle. And I feel like with the way the game has played out, and considering the circumstances here, I think Britney could be in a spot to get towards the end of the game unnoticed, where we have at this point seen 3 traitors being taken out in a row, with Carolyn having just gone out the door. And even with Danielle going out, even if Danielle has to reveal the fact that she's a traitor, I think that only benefits Britney even more to skate towards the end of the game, especially considering the fact that we have not had a single round without a murder here. I could see a world where the faithfuls in the game could assume that no other traitors have been recruited. And through that, I think that'll make it even easier for Britney to get towards the end of the game. So I think from a pure gameplay perspective, there's definitely a path for Britney to get to the end and have people convince them to end the game without taking out Britney there. I think that's all pretty good. Now, again, I still don't think it's a surefire thing. I could still see it going the other way to where Dylan and Gabby do eventually come around to taking out Britney. I'm not saying it's a for sure thing that a traitor will win, but if I had to pick right now between whether we're getting a Dylan-Gabby win or a Britney win, I am leaning towards a Britney win at this current point. And while that could definitely change in the future weeks, I am going to stake that claim right now, which is why she's here on number 1. And there we go, that'll do it for this week's video. If you like this content, be sure to like and subscribe, really helps with the channel. Now I'll be back again next week to update the power rankings again, so you can look forward to that. I'm covering Australian Survivor Brains vs. Brawn 2 along with Survivor 48, so you can expect weekly power rankings of those shows. I'm on Patreon and have YouTube memberships, so if you want to consider supporting the channel, you can do so by clicking the link in the description. And you can also join the Discord server by also clicking the link in the description. There's a lot of stuff coming your way, but for now, that is the video. See ya.